Okay, thanks, Joyce. So our study is called, it's got a bit of an unwieldy name, Maximising Informal Volunteering as a Community Resource to Support the Mental Health and Wellbeing of Adults Across the Life Course. That's our study team there. So what I'm going to talk about today is a bit of quick background to the study, some PPIE input and some initial results, and also I'm going to talk a little bit about how our peer researcher, Yasmin, who you met earlier, has helped us on the study, helped us inform really should be our interpretation of results. So what is it we're doing? This is kind of an amalgamation of all the research questions into one, just to give you a brief idea of what it is. So what is the relationship between informal volunteering and mental health among disadvantaged and minoritized groups? Informal volunteering probably needs a bit of explanation. It's a bit of terminology that most people aren't familiar with, and that's one of the things that came out in the initial consultations with members of the public. So the study itself, it's realist informed. So Fiona has just been talking a little bit about that. So what works for whom and under what circumstances. So it's, as Fiona said, it's a way of looking at complex interventions and the ways in which they might work for different groups of people in different contexts. It was a mixed methods review, interviews, photo voice and focus groups. There's also a practitioner survey. The bulk of it, however, was interviews with participants. So we initially aimed to target some groups and communities in different locations. So due to the makeup of the team being from Cambridge, London, the Southwest and the Northeast. So the groups we wanted to look at in particular were travellers. That was mainly in Cambridgeshire. Travellers were very, very difficult to recruit, as we found out. Older adults in the Southwest and the Northeast, and asylum seekers and refugees in London, Cambridgeshire and the Northeast. So we had some initial PPIE input. This was mostly, or actually it was probably entirely Joyce's work, who got out into the community and asked people about informal volunteering. And what we found, as I said, is that people, if you say informal volunteering, they don't really know what you mean. There's a couple of official definitions of informal volunteering. So it's doing work for others that's unpaid and it's not via an organization. So really, it's just the sort of helping that people do with their friends, neighbours, family, extended family, people in their street, etc. You know, it's the sort of thing like you might go and do some shopping for an older person that can't leave the house. You might go and cut the grass for them or look after someone's kids while they go for an appointment, that sort of thing. So it was the concept itself was very clearly understood amongst minoritized communities. They didn't really recognize it as what we think of as volunteering. I think that goes for probably most people, not just minoritized communities. If you say informal volunteering to someone, they'll just kind of look at you blankly. If you explain what's just kind of helping people, they just, you know, they'll go, ah, right, I get it now. So that was useful PPIE input. It just made us think about the use of jargon, and just the sort of language we used and the way we talk to people. And I think it set us up well for the forthcoming interviews. So I want to talk a little bit about our peer researcher, Yasmin, who you met earlier. So Yasmin's been fully part of the research team, not since the very outset. I think there's a slight issue around there about funding, and in that we could only take Yasmin on once we had the funding in place. I think, you know, there are funding schemes that you can draw on to that will give you a bit of upfront money in order to do that. I think those should be more. Well, I think there should be more of those, because because really you want a peer researcher run right from the start, right from when you're thinking about your concept and what it is you want to do. But Yasmin's time in the study, she's brought her lived experience in formulating questions for study participants, for example, that informed writing topic guides for interviews. She's had input into the data interpretation. So what do people mean when they say this? I identified particular concepts in the data around ethnicity, culture, disadvantage and marginalisation. And Yasmin spoke earlier about our own mental health issues. And I think that's, as well as her background, I think they've both really helped with, certainly me, in thinking about how to approach some of these communities, how to frame questions, what the answers actually meant when we got them. So a little bit about, well, some results now. So again, going back to what Fiona says, we used realist-informed techniques for this study. So what works for whom and under what circumstances. So another way of thinking about that is context, mechanism, and the outcome. So in this case, our outcome was mental health broadly, but that could be anything from depression, anxiety, to well-being. The mechanism is how it works. So how does something work? How does involvement in informal volunteering, how can it affect someone's mental health? I probably should have said earlier that there's lots of evidence out there around formal volunteering, which is a type of volunteering you'll do through another organisation. There's lots of evidence to say that is supportive of mental health. So our initial programme theories were derived from our literature review. We used that to inform our later data collection. So thinking about topic guides of what comes up in the literature, and using that to sort of inform your topic guide, what you're going to actually ask people in the interviews. How am I doing for time? 5 minutes? Yeah. So here's our first initial programme theory. Again, this is the work of Joyce, who's done an awful lot on the study. So this is the first one that we came up with, and we've called it pro-sociality. So that's around people taking a more pro-social or communitarian outlook, I suppose, rather than an individualistic one. So when you think about your community a bit more, when you're perhaps more deeply embedded in your community, you care about it, and you naturally want to help people out in your community. And that can be influenced by things like age. We did find that older people were quite communitarian in their outlook. Also culture, religion, interestingly, military experience. So there was one paper in the review which looked at ex-military people. And although clearly the military is very hierarchical in its structure, there's also very much a communitarian-based outlook among serving members of the military and also ex-members of the military. So this was in the UK. So I thought that was quite interesting, because it's not something that would have occurred to me, but people who leave the armed forces still want to contribute and do their bit for society. So the resource in this case being the framework around social roles for people. So people wanting to basically chip in and help out their community. There's a feeling of mutual exchange and reciprocity. So that I think it's not the case that people go into it thinking they might get something in return, but certainly there's a kind of background of reciprocity where if everyone has the feeling that if they all chip in and do something, it'll benefit the whole community. So in terms of the response to that, so there can be improvements in confidence and self-esteem, a sense of value, and that was something that came up with certainly the older people who were retired and were often looking for that continuation of the social value that they felt when they were working. They didn't want to just feel that they were being a burden to society as they aged. They still wanted to give something back. And there's this whole idea about a sense of belonging. There's a downside to that, though. So there can be a feeling of an expectation that you will help out your community that can move on to being a sense of obligation, so that you feel you don't have a choice. And that can clearly lead to feelings of stress, perhaps even resentment, if you think, you're being pushed into doing something whether you like it or not. So it becomes not really volunteering, although to the outside world, it probably is. That's probably what it looks like. But to the individual involved, it can feel like a burden. So that's one downside. And I think it's something we need to be aware of, so that we're try and be aware that, for example, the burden doesn't fall on certain members of the community, i.e. women end up doing lots of caring roles, often whether they want to or not. So our next, we actually came up with 3 of these program theories. I'm only going to talk about 2 today, because the truth is one's kind of half developed. We've not quite got there yet. But this next one is something that we've called chronic communal crisis, although we've actually changed that. We didn't really think that was a great title. We're thinking about a better way of framing that. So this is in something that can happen in marginalised communities, or communities that experience deprivation or marginalisation. There's this feeling of we're all in it together, kind of this shared poverty, and also the idea that they're limited access to resources, that people have a sort of sense of belonging and pulling together to just try and get through life. And this isn't a short-term thing. That was the third one we were thinking about, was short-term things like COVID or perhaps 9/11. But this is, it is chronic. It goes on and on for years. It's long-term. And this
Calum,
yeah.
Calum, you've got 1 minute left.
Okay. So this can engender a sense of interconnectedness, group belonging, solidarity, even. And this can give people feelings that they want to help out their community, because they might feel that there's outside pressure on them. They're under this burden of marginalisation constantly, and so they also like to chip in. They also like to do their bit to help their community. The downside of that, again, is there can be sense of frustration, resentment. Am I never going to get out of this? Is this my life, forever? Do I constantly have to think about helping people, even though I'm struggling quite badly myself? So just to sum up, we had PPIE input at several stages throughout the project, vital input from Yasmin. We've identified 3 CMOs: prosociality, this chronic sense of crisis, and the short to medium term crisis, which is the one I haven't spoken about today. Thank you.